Welcome! Happy Thursday. This is SessionWell. My name is Adam Luke.
I'm Judy Yang.
And why does SessionWell exist? I'm sorry, we're all getting through an evening. SessionWell exists because we wanted a place for pre-licensed clinicians, licensed clinicians, and everyday Joes to be able to come and look at the resources that we use every day when we're going through therapy or the psychological makeup of some of the things we deal with in society. So this evening we have an amazing guest, but first...
we welcome everyone tonight. Thanks for joining us. If you're ever looking to do your own podcast or do any sort of promo videos, lead generations, or web design, my brother Fred can do all of that with Kira Studios, his own marketing agency. So feel free to hit him up too if you want to make your stuff look awesome.
Now we have an amazing guest to talk about. I can't wait for this one. This is an individual I've known for about 3 years. And she's pretty much, she'll knock your socks off every time you're talking to her about something deep. So I've always enjoyed this.
No pressure.
And your name?
My name is Jackie or Jacqueline. I go by either, whichever people prefer. Jacqueline Mack-Harris, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist.
But you're so much more than that also.
Oh yeah, that's just like one of her titles.
Mom, grandma.
Absolutely.
Air Force retired.
Well, I'm an Air Force veteran. Yes. I was in for 4 years, 4.5 years, because I got called back to active duty for a little bit. But I did not retire. I did my 4 and got out. I was a medic, got out and became an LVN, which is something you can do if you're a medic in the military. You can challenge the state you live in and take the test. And so I've worked as a nurse for over 20 years and transitioned into mental health and became a marriage and family therapist. I am a mother of 2. I have 2 daughters. One is 27 and one is almost 25. Amazing son-in-law who is in the Navy. We are a military family. My husband, who I've been married to for 30 years, was in the Marine Corps.
There you go.
And I have 2 grandchildren. One is 4 and one is almost 4 and almost 2. So those are my people.
You're also a professor.
I am a professor. I'm assistant professor at Hope International University and a doctoral candidate at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you do a lot.
I do a lot.
Yes.
I do a lot.
Just a few hats there.
And she lives
Just
really far away, and she came to join us tonight really late. So we're really thankful.
My pleasure.
So the topic this evening is a topic that I don't think a lot of people even know it exists. So you can say it better than I can. So what are we talking about this evening?
So we're talking about third culture kids. Third culture kids, cross-cultural kids, multicultural kids. But the idea first came to me with a missionary talking to me about third cultural kids because my dissertation is on a program that I created called Reset. And the idea is to help people who are in the military who have deployed reconnect with their families when they come back. So I'm looking at how to best help them reintegrate into their families, not just into society. And in having this conversation with the missionary in Honduras, he said it would also be helpful for their kids, their third culture kids. So I said, well, what is that? And he said, well, imagine America is blue and Honduras is yellow. And people from the blue place go and live in the yellow place. Well, what happens when you put blue and yellow together? You get green. So now these people don't fit in the yellow place, but they also don't really fit back in the blue place. And that's what their kids experience. And it's not by their choice. Their parent takes a job as a missionary, maybe they have a business obligation, or they're in the military, and the child goes and lives outside of their parents' passport country during their formidable years. Then when they return back to the passport country, it doesn't feel like home. What feels like home is whatever the host country was. But it's not actually home. They're not a citizen there, so they don't actually fit there. And those residents look at them as other, right? You're American.
Yeah.
You're not Honduran. But then when they're back in America, they have the cultural norms and behaviors and style of the country that they were hosted in. So it's really hard for them to feel like they fit anywhere. And so in our research, we're finding that people who have had this experience they don't feel rooted. They don't feel like they belong. They belong everywhere and nowhere. And as therapists, if we're not aware of that, then we're kind of lacking in our cultural competency without even knowing that we are.
Right.
Because it's not something that we typically are trained for or we talk about. And so I really want to help people be able to reintegrate into their family dynamics, whether it's, a teenager coming home and hanging out with their cousins during the summer and feeling like they belong, or whether it's someone in the military coming back from deployment and needing to connect with their wife and children. And if we don't look at the things that cause the connections to be broken, then it's hard to really figure out a way to mend them.
Yeah. And so the first time this was explained to me, it sort of blew my mind. Because I'll say, I heard about this when you first started working through it, of like, so that was like, what, a year and a half? And I was like, oh, wow, that was a total clinical blind spot for myself. Because you do go, oh, well, you were born in America, you may have lived in Taiwan or Singapore. I mean, we had a third culture kid here ourselves. And it's like, but you're American, but no, you're not.
Right.
And so that place doesn't exist.
Right.
So you sort of sit there and go, I have the experience of just moving all over this country, but then when you bring in the fact that your culture can be completely different, social cues are completely different, and you try to make friends in a new place, but technically it's your old place.
Right.
Yeah.
But as you said, especially for missionary children, they may be American citizens in some other country, but they've never experienced America.
Right.
And I know that side. I know a missionary couple that when they moved back with their 3 boys, their boys technically, they were American citizens, but they were never here. So
They had never been here. My granddaughter was born in Spain, and so her first language was Spanish. Her preschool was Spanish.
Oh, wow.
And so we were like, she doesn't have words. She's almost 2. What's wrong? Why isn't she should have more language? But, well, she speaks Spanish. Right? So, in baby talk, she speaks Spanish, right? So not only is it another language, it's also infantile. And so my daughter picked up on that. She's like, oh, she is saying cup. She's just not saying it in English. And that's her foundation. So that's always going to be a part of her experience.
A beautiful part, right?
Absolutely. It's just that a lot of times it's longer, right? So not only are you, it's not just for 2 years. You're there for 4 years, 6 years. And so had she been in Spain for longer, then she would have more of the mannerisms and the experience of being Spanish. My grandson is 4. He was there, I think, 3 years. And so one of the things me and my daughter talked about was him coming to America. In Spain, people are just, really friendly. It's safe, and grandmothers and moms will walk up and pick your kid up and start talking to you, and that was okay culturally. And so that had to shift coming to America. And now we have to talk about stranger danger. You can't just go off to the neighbor's house, and so just preparing them for things to be different. Well, imagine having to do that with someone who's lived 10, 11, 12 years of their life in this other country, or even the parents aren't aware of it, so they don't do anything about it. And the kid's just like, why is this so hard? What's wrong with me?
That's so interesting, because it's just now I'm clicking. It's like, when I first read what you were going to talk about, I was like, oh, that's me. Like, I was born in Taiwan, but then I grew up here. But the only thing is I haven't gone back to Taiwan, really. And so I do remember going to China when I was in 3rd grade. And it was like, we all went to China, but it's like, they could tell we weren't typical Chinese, because one, we were bigger, and like we were dressed very American, and that did feel really weird. Like, it felt out of place. And then this other thing I'm thinking about is my future father-in-law. He was born here. He's white. Hi, Mr. Jackson. But he grew up in Japan, and then when I first met him, like, he speaks fluent Japanese, and it's like crazy, because it's just like, oh, like, in a way I get a blend of like Asian culture in my future family, but then also like the American side. And so it's interesting, because I wonder if he's feels this too, and to have like an actual name. Like, I didn't know it was called Third Culture Kids.
And so what you described about yourself is CrossCultural Kids. Right. So there's that as well. And oftentimes with CrossCultural Kids, maybe their home life. So if at home things are Taiwanese with parents, grandparents, maybe there's a language that's spoken that's different than what you might speak at school or at work. And so you're stuck in between these two worlds.
Yes.
And I think a lot of us experience that same thing with the military. If you are what we would call a military brat, the language of every branch of the service is different. It's its own culture. And so the Air Force has its own culture, the Marine Corps has its own culture, the Navy has its own culture, the Army has its own culture, and then the military is its own culture. So if you've grown up in that environment and then you go into civilian life because your parents get out, or you make friends that maybe go to your school but they're not in the military, the way that you see the world is different than the way that they see the world. So that's cross-cultural. We can also be domestic TCKs. And I think that's what you were kind of talking about, Adam. So I was born in South Bend, Indiana, raised in California. And I would go to South Bend every summer and be with my cousins. But I'm the California cousin. I'm still different than they are. I never really fit. I didn't feel excluded, but I see things differently than the way that they see things, having lived in South Bend their whole lives. And I'm the visitor, even though I was, my birth certificate says South Bend too. Right? So culturally, we're just different.
Don't you have that too?
Because I was born in California, raised in Illinois and North Carolina, and then came back to California.
Right. So domestic TCK.
So that's different to think about. But it's a truth because in Illinois I was still a Californian. In North Carolina I was still a Californian. And then you come back to California and they're like, you are not us.
Right. You're a transplant.
Yeah. I mean, first day of school I was like, can I wear overalls? And my mom was like, no, not in California. That's not how this does. I'm like, so... who's gone hunting? Shut up.
Right.
It is different.
It is definitely different. It is definitely different, yep.
And I feel it too, and I didn't think about it this way either, but I am getting more Asians in my practice because there is something about being Asian American because we, like my brother and I, we come home to a very Asian mom and dad and they speak Chinese and a lot of their cultural values and traditions are very much embedded in our home. But then we're raised here, and even though I wasn't born here, but like I pretty much grew up here, there's a lot of pushback and conflict between like Asian parents and their kids. And so I do get a lot of clients that are, there's like, it's like, you know, like the tiger mom, and it's like, do you know what that is? And I think some of my Asian clients, if they don't have therapists that are familiar with what that means to have a tiger mom, because like in a white family, I guess, there's no such thing as a tiger mom.
Right. Can you explain what tiger mom is?
It's Angela Yen, I'm just kidding, which is my mother. I'm just kidding. She's actually way more relaxed and flexible. I know.
You want to put that out there?
I love my mom. A tiger mom is someone, and my mom's not fully tiger mom, but a tiger mom is someone that's like very strict with certain things like academics and being successful. Every Asian has to be a pharmacist, a doctor, a lawyer. Someone like my brother who's more like entrepreneur doing his own thing, like that isn't really typically like allowed in this home. And then you have to be really just, I wouldn't say submissive, but you have to be very respectful of the elders. And it's pretty much, they're on top, like the joke is like a B+ isn't good, an A- isn't good enough. It has to be an A or an A+.
Yeah.
And so it's just very much like, you know, you have to do it this way or it's just not okay. My mom isn't like that as much. For school, she never cared as much, but it was very much like, you have to go to a UC school. You cannot go to community college. You have to get a job. It needs to be 9 to 5. So just very like...
And so you have that at home, but then you're in community with your friends who don't have that same experience.
Because from the other side of that community, it's like, I would say for most white families, it was more of like, oh, we're not going to have our kid work so they can focus on school, right? And so I can know that, like, again, that's another dynamic of you're hearing, like, no, grades, and then you can have other sides of the community where it's like, well, no, that's not what we value, but it's so interesting.
And then it's coming from my side of the fence, you need to get a job. So school was hard for you anyway. No one really did good in school. So college isn't the thing that we're aiming for, but you're going to have to get a job or go to school. But most people are going to get a job. And really, I remember being told you're going to get a job or you're going to go to the military because you're not great in school. And that was the discussion. And so going to school took me off the beaten path, but I did. I went to the military first. Because that was the choice that felt the most realistic for me.
Okay. Yeah. I would say something simple as food. Like in our culture, we share food. when I first met my fiance, he doesn't like to share food, but he's gotten so much better, honey. You're so much better.
Stay strong, Jay. Don't worry, I was the same way.
Were you too?
Oh, absolutely. It was. I was going through my formative years. I'm also an only child, right?
Oh, okay.
And so it's different. Because my autonomy was like self-built in basically from the beginning.
Yeah.
Especially my parents always had to work jobs, so I was like, you have to be self-autonomous. But that side of the whole sharing, I remember first date with my wife. We went to In-N-Out, and I said, "Do you want fries?" She said no. So I said, "Okay." She gets a burger, I get a burger, and I order animal fries for myself. Right?
Delicious.
I'm sitting there, I'm eating my burger. I see this fork come over and like pick it up. I'm like, this chick doesn't respect boundaries. This is over. And I'm like, well, this was quick. Like, best $20 I knew. This ain't gonna work. And then 9 years later. So it's one of those things. But again, like you said, it was sharing a culture. And I would say for her family's culture has always been family meals, sharing. But they were very traveled. Love Europe, love that culture per se, and so that's a part of it.
Yeah.
So what would you say to someone, so like how do you, I don't know, what would you say to someone that's struggling with just that disconnection from both cultures?
So the first thing is that it's okay, you're not alone. What I've been finding out in our interviews is people didn't know that was a thing, right? People didn't know that what they were experiencing, other people were experiencing too. Research does show that TCKs gravitate towards other TCKs. That's where they find community and roots, is with others. But if you don't even know that it's a thing, you don't know to go out and search for it. There are websites out there that are dedicated to TCKs, and there are groups of people who get together, and there's a lot more research being done. But as therapists, I'm an attachment theory therapist, and so it all goes back to attachment, right? And so if during your formidable years, your attachment's disrupted by all these moves and changes, and you don't know if these friends are going to be there next month, right? So you can dive in, get really close really fast, and then disconnect really quickly too. Or you learn to really not connect with people at all, so maybe you have more of an avoidant style of attachment because, well, I don't know where we're going to be in the next 2 years, I don't know where we're going to be in the next 4 years, and so people are kind of disposable.
And why invest in that?
So the first thing is just that this is a thing, you're not crazy, right? It's relational. We were all created to be in a relationship. We want to be seen, safe, and secure. And when you don't even feel like you have a place that when you put your feet down, it feels like home, it makes sense that you don't feel secure.
Yeah, why would I open up? It's almost like it's not even worth the effort, right? That's sort of what we trick ourselves into, is that it's not worth the effort.
It's not worth the effort.
Just because it's so painful to detach and continually detach.
And it's going to happen again. You know it's coming again. There are people who are really good at forming relationships and maintaining them. My husband, for example, he still remembers names and faces and situations of people he went to high school with.
Wow.
I never forgot high school.
That happened.
I can't. Remember that I went through it.
Right, I know I was actually there, and he said that for me, friends are disposable. I have more of an avoidant style of attachment, but I'm there in the summer with these people, and then I've got to be gone, and then I'm back again with them, and then I've got to be gone. So I never really felt like I had a concrete place, and I'm the oldest of 3, and so I am always momming, right? I'm always the one that's in charge of making sure everybody else is okay. So there wasn't really a whole lot of that for me. There's another level of cross-culturalism that has to do with being a part of the majority, the dominant culture, or not, right? So when I took multicultural perspectives in school, I remember the assignment about cultural perspective.
Yes.
And I was like, we just assimilate, right? Wherever we are, we just do whatever the culture is doing. Well, that's the same thing the TCKs feel, right? They just have to, wherever they are, that's home, and when in Rome, do as Romans. And so that happens when you're not a part of the dominant culture, because you're expected to just kind of assimilate. So we hear things like, oh, we're a melting pot, or oh, we're all the same, or we're all just people. We all put our pants on the same way,
we don't see color.
We don't see color. And the fact is we are different,
Yeah.
and that's not a bad thing. And when we're trying to make everybody feel like they're all the same, that then says that thing you're looking for, that autonomy, the being okay, being different, is bad. We should just all be the same. And when it doesn't feel like it's okay inside, then you start to feel like, well, something must be wrong with me because I can't settle down in this.
Right.
Especially when you're essentially trying to, in that like, oh, we're all a melting pot, we're actually trying to dismiss large quantities of what's important to people, what they value,
Exactly.
or
So
something
I would
that
say
they found special.
I would rather be a part of a salad bowl than a melting pot.
That makes sense.
I don't want to dump a whole bunch of cheeses in and make this one new cheese.
Yeah.
Let's just have the croutons and the tomatoes and the cucumbers and the different kinds of lettuce and the salad dressing. It's
I like
all
that.
better because you can have all these different flavors working together. Then you take all of that salad stuff and throw it in a blender and drink it. Like,
I like
no,
that analogy.
you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because now it all tastes like beets.
Yes.
Right? Right? Because you just
Right. Or
smooth it
grass.
all out, right? Or grass, right? Why not allow each flavor to be
Yes.
unique and distinct and work together?
And
That's
add
what
its
makes
own
them
value
meal.
to the salad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Because you're essentially making it then as a culture bland.
Right.
Because if nothing tastes like its individual self, nothing is going to exist as itself.
Right. And I think sometimes that comes from fear,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Like if we are taking in all these cultures, there's also multiculturalism, right? So we have all these families where they're mixed race families. And so they're not just dealing with one culture. And those kids don't have a box to check, right? It's other,
True.
right? Because they're neither black nor white. They're neither Japanese or Indian, right? They're this blend that there's really no real name for, but they're told you just have to pick other, right?
Yeah.
And really that just means that they are going to start to try to be something so that they can fit in. And I think that fear causes people to try to make us all the same, because if your culture takes over too much, does that somehow diminish the importance of my culture? And I think that that's a lot of the reason why we go with, we're just a melting pot.
Right.
Yeah. We approve of diversity, but really, we really want to just kind of smooth it out. And I think that that's what leaves people feeling disconnected.
Right.
And so we have to promote the fact that difference is beautiful. We're all created
Exactly.
differently for a reason.
And I would admit I have that fear too, because I'm hoping in the future I'll have little mixed babies. But I tell AJ all the time, like, I just want our kid to like blend in. I just want the kid to like blend in and be accepted and not stand out. And like, I don't want them to be too Asian, but then I don't want them to like lose the Asian part.
Right.
And I think about that. I'm like, that's just so silly, because our kid is going to be two different things, but it's like, just let them be who they are. And I think it's because it's more a projection of how I've grown up.
Right.
Like, to be the only Asian in an all-white private school, minus my brother.
Right.
We're like two of like the four Asians.
Yeah.
In order to fit in and to have friends and stuff, we had to like fit like everybody else. Even though we totally don't look like everybody else, we didn't grow up in the same culture. So it's interesting. I do think fear is a huge one.
Yep.
Let's just be.
And then you want that for your child, because you don't want your child to ever feel like they stand out or have people point their finger at them as being
Yes.
different. Because if you've ever experienced being the only black person or Asian person in the room, sometimes it can be uncomfortable. It can make you feel out of place. And so you try to do what everybody else is doing, right? You're going to try to sit how they sit, and like, imagine being at a dinner table, fancy meal, and afraid you're going to use the wrong fork or knife. It's that same thing, but in everyday life, not just at an elegant meal. It's you walk out of the door and you aren't the dominant culture, and so you have to think about how you look and how you sound, especially if there are cultural stereotypes that you have to try to undo, and that you probably carry the weight of. Because if you're the only Asian in school, you are all Asians, right? You are what people are going to know.
Everybody.
You represent everybody, every different country, right?
And that's what my mom would say too. So like, part of like Tiger Mom stuff too is you represent all of us, and so don't shame us. Don't, like, you better have this like perfect face on and just have it all together, because we have to save face. Like, don't embarrass us.
Right. That just from what you're saying, that was a huge, incredible amount of weight.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Because I get to humbly say I'm the ignorant one in this, because that's something that I didn't realize till after I moved around and realized like, oh, wait a second, some cultures don't respect the same things. Like when I grew up in the South, you know, my parents did not raise me to recognize certain cultures or individuals differently. And then when you're just a stupid little kid saying stuff, and they're like, well, no, we don't go that side of the town, or we don't go to that church, or we don't. And it's like, well, why don't we go to the church? And there's this whole cultural dynamic that's playing out. And all of a sudden, I know from that side, it cost me friends because people didn't like the side of the town that we lived in or where we were. And so I'm just like, why? But there was a different side of it. And so even though I had hardships of a little kid trying to build friends in different towns, I never experienced it from the side of I had to walk in the room and be cognizant of who I walked in as a majority.
So, yeah, I'm sure your mom had fear not wanting. There's a reason why she didn't want you to wear overalls to class.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Stand out.
In California,
California.
So, I mean, and so that's when we talk about the cultures, it was like the town I grew up in North Carolina, the reason why my mom literally packed us up in a U-Haul was like, I've got to get my kid out of this state, was the highlight of life was to be a manager at Walmart. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not putting that down. That's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But I remember having a discussion with my first grade teacher, and she said, think of something that you would want to be when you grow up. And I said, I want to be an astronaut. And she said, why don't you think about a janitor? And my mom was just like, wait a second, and questioned this individual. And that person was like, well, you know, the biggest thing in this town is to be the manager of Walmart. I was like, well, I think my world for my kid should be larger than this town. But that goes back to like cultures and social dynamics, and but that has always been, I've always appreciated our conversations because I can say I haven't experienced things through your eyes, and to hear that only helps me working with the individuals I work with.
That's how we build cultural competency is by having these conversations.
But I think that just other cultures, like when they're looking for therapists, I think sometimes they are more biased towards someone of the same whatever.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether it's religion or race or culture, it's just because their fear is that someone that's more the dominant culture is going to tell them something that's completely against what has been ingrained in them in their culture, because it's what, you know, like Americans, we value like individualism and assertiveness and that kind of stuff. And if that's, or like just say no to your parents. For some kids in certain cultures, that's like not ever allowed.
You cannot do that. Yeah, I had someone said to me today that they, sitting with their therapist, when they were talking about their difference and how it feels to kind of stand out in that way, the response from the therapist is, but it's beautiful. And it's like, yeah, I know it's beautiful. This isn't an image issue, right? This isn't a self-esteem issue for me, but the difference shows and I feel it. But the therapist, being of the dominant culture, has never had to experience that. So it's like, no, I don't want you to feel shame about that or bad about that. They're trying their best to help them with it, but really they're invalidating the problem. Right? Because the problem is, no, I stand out, I'm different, I don't fit in the environment that I'm in the majority of the time, and I need to be able to talk about that. And so I think that as therapists, we have to be willing to give room for that.
Absolutely.
And let them express the fact that it's hurtful. We don't have to put a pretty bow on everything. Yeah, it really sucks to not feel like you fit. And to desire that so much. And you're right. I've had people seek me out because of my military experience, because I get it. And I've had people seek me out. I want a female, Black, Christian therapist with some ministry experience. That they're
she
looking
pulls you
for all
off the
of
menu
that.
of therapist.
Right.
This
that
is the one.
that
The
one.
Jackie Mack. I'll take that one, please.
and there aren't a whole lot of us, right?
Yeah.
So we have to figure out how to help people who maybe don't have experience with the military or a certain culture be open to the conversation, so that their client can feel safe with them in the same way that they might feel safe with someone who they feel knows them better.
And with you saying that, one of the first clients I had as an associate, I was from a different culture, and we did great work on what we worked on, but we ended up reaching a point that it was like, when we really sat there and were talking about it, I was like, okay, it's actually going to be better if you find a therapist from your culture, because I can't, as much as I want to give you empathy, I can never match the real life experience.
Right.
And it was like 8 months after we had ended our session, and I got a call and said, no, that was the right, like, I want to let you know this was the right idea.
Right.
And it was a lot of weight also off of me. Because here's the thing, Google is never going to take care of life experience.
Right.
So no matter how much I wanted to be competent for this individual,
Right.
I have not experienced what you've experienced.
Right, and you can empathize, and you can sit in the space with them and give them a safe place to discuss it and talk about it, but you can't actually relate to the experience. And I think it's okay for us to be able to say that. Like I've never been a white male, right?
Me either.
Right?
Yeah.
And so
What's it like?
yeah, right? And so there are times where I'm going to be working with a white male that I'm like, I got nothing. I can't. We're going to need to refer. Let's call Adam.
And you know, the thing is, I feel like that discussion needs to happen more, because I think, especially when you start off as a therapist, whether you're an associated trainee or you just got licensed, we then somehow accept that that's our own deficiency in how good of a therapist we are, and it's not.
Right.
And I think that when you bring it up, like the salad bowl, right? It's not dismissing that you're a crouton.
Right.
But guess what? Tomatoes like tomatoes.
Right.
Like,
Right.
They hang out together.
Yeah, the crouton cannot talk to the tomato about its squishiness on the inside.
Yeah.
Right? I can never understand what that's like.
The vine. I
Right.
remember the vine.
The vine. Exactly.
No, you don't.
No.
So, and it's not an area of therapy or even a space where you can fake it till you make it, because if you do, you're actually just completely dismissing that individual's problems.
And the problem isn't always culture, right? So there are times where the difference doesn't matter because that's not what the issue is. But if the issue is a person feeling like they don't belong in the world, they don't fit right in their skin, and you can't relate to them because you've never experienced what they've experienced, then maybe referral is the best thing.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that just because you haven't been a drug addict, you can't work with a drug addict, or just because you don't have children, you can't work with parents, or just because you've never been married, you can't work with a couple.
Yeah.
But when the problem is a cultural issue and you've never, whether it's military or race or religion or whatever it is, you don't understand it or don't have a heart for it, then I think it's okay to say, I may not be the best fit for you. Let's see if we can find what you need. And that's, first do no harm. That is what we're called
Ethically,
to do.
we're called to that, right?
Yeah, I recently had an experience, and it wasn't culture, but I have a student he is in a wheelchair, and he's been one his whole life, and he was just kind of telling me how when he when he like goes into a room, like he's different automatically, and he wants to go to a dance, but everyone keeps saying just go to the dance, but he's like, I don't dance like everybody else, and there's no one that can tell me that I'm going to just fit perfectly in. And I literally looked at him and I was like, yeah, man, like I have no idea. I can't even pretend to act like I know what you're talking about, because I know how it feels to be different being Asian, but that is not the same thing as what you're explaining. And it just was, I only just sat there with him and let him talk, but it was one of those things where I'm not going to act like I can.
Yeah.
Like you get it.
Yeah, like I get it, because I don't.
And I think that is really the most helpful thing. If someone were to tell me that they knew exactly what my experience was, and I'm looking at them going, you can't possibly, and even if we're the same in many ways, it's still been my experience. And so it feels invalidating to say, oh no, I know exactly how you feel. No, you don't. Or even when you're in a relationship with people, so the parents of people who are TCKs, oh, I know what you're going through. No, I'm a TCK. You're the parent that took the job that was getting paid to be somewhere else. I didn't really have a choice in this, so you really, and I'm a kid. You don't really understand what my experience is. So I think it's important for us to be able to just validate when people say, this is hard, this isn't working for me, or I feel this way, rather than, no, it's going to be fine. Because that's about us trying to make ourselves feel better. We're going to soothe ourselves. Because we're uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, no, as long as you accept everything's fine, then I don't have to work on myself.
Right.
What would you suggest for people that are either in relationships with a TKC or friends with a TKC?
So I would just have them to be okay with it, right? So if I'm friends with someone who's a TCK and they're having a hard time adjusting in a particular situation, there's a story in one of the books that I read where a girl grew up, and I think it was in Singapore, and then she went back down south in America to be with her cousins, and they were going out cruising. Well, for her, cruising meant getting in a boat and cruising. Well, cruising in America usually means we're going to get in the car and we're going to drive around aimlessly for absolutely no reason at all.
And waste gas.
Right? And waste gas. And she just couldn't understand why that was. So I feel like if you are in relationships with people who are struggling with that, just to be okay with it. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you because cruising means riding around in the car.
Or my cruising's better than your cruising.
Right. And so you don't have to shame the other person or well, what's wrong with you in order for you to be okay. And if you're in a relationship with someone, a romantic relationship with someone, I think there's a lot of questions that you need to ask. And I just think that that's just true. In general, people get married without having conversations about all kinds of things that are really important. And the cultural things, again, we don't want to be different. So if you're culturally different than the person you're in relationship with, we want to make it seem like it's no big deal, and so we don't talk about it. And actually, it's going to be a big deal at some point, so you might as well talk about it sooner rather than later. Yeah. Even my husband being from down south and me growing up in California, we are night and day different. I mean, when we first went, our first date, I wanted tacos, and he said, "What's a taco?" I married him anyway, but I'm like,
we can look past certain things.
You know what a taco is? But he'd never.
Oh, he never had taco?
Well, he grew up in a place where there were black people and white people, and that was it. So he came to California, and he's like, where are the black people, and what are they? He'd never seen Mexicans. He knew that they existed. He knew that Asian people existed. He'd heard about it in history books, but he'd never really seen anyone. And so his life experience was different than mine. I grew up in California where there was gang life, right? He didn't know anything about Crips and Bloods. I grew up surrounded by that.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about people being lynched and that being spit on as you're walking home from school.
Yeah.
So when he would talk about civil rights stuff, and I'd be like, well, that happened way back when. And he's like, no, I'm going to revoke your black card if you don't pay attention to this. and I'm just like, well, that's such old stuff. Because in California, that wasn't the problem. Whereas he's like, what's this gang stuff? Why are black people fighting each other over what they wear? We came from two completely different cultures, and then we raised our children in Orange County. And so they're completely they're girls who they're amazing people. I wouldn't have hung out with them when I was in school. They're a whole different set of people than who I was, right? So their culture is different because they're the combination of the two of us.
Yeah.
And from Orange County. They're not from South Central LA or the Deep South. They're they're Orange County girls.
Yeah, interesting.
So how about from this side? Because I'm thinking of we have on this podcast we have a following of individuals that are in the military from all different branches. We also have missionaries that tune in as well. So I'm thinking from the parent dynamic. Let's say I'm a parent, I'm raising my kids, they're going to be this third culture kid. Maybe I'm on deployment, maybe I'm in my mission field. What do they do to help sort of prepare their kids? Because I've heard that also is like, what do we do? Yeah,
I think just as if your kids didn't have the TCK issue, we as parents, we need to be open to having conversation and dialogue with their kids about things that might be hard, right? Okay. And a lot of times parents don't say anything because they're afraid if they say something, they will make it a problem, right? So if I don't talk about how hard this TCK thing is, then they won't have an issue with it. But if I bring it up, I might put this idea in their mind that's not there. And oftentimes the idea is there, they're curious, but you've already made it clear that you're not the person that's safe for them to come talk to them about it. I think having parents that understand your struggle or that are open to at least being a part of the conversation with you eases some of the discomfort of feeling like you don't fit. Because at least you fit here with your parents, right? Your parents get you if nobody else does. And when your parents don't get you, when they're like, it's no big deal, right? Then you're like, I don't even fit here in my own family. So I just say parents just need to be open, be transparent about their own struggles with it, right? A lot of times as parents, we try to make everything look really easy and really good, and so that we don't put stress on our children. But they sometimes need to know that you're dealing with something too. Then they don't feel like they always have to be perfect. They're always trying to live up to this impossible standard that you're not even actually living up to yourself. You
True.
just make it look
Yep.
really good.
Yeah. And a lot of times our children only get to see us from one side, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they think of mom or dad at home, but they don't understand. Maybe you're struggling at work.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going through the same thing.
You
of
miss
trying-
your friends. You're having a hard time making friends in this new
Yeah.
community, and maybe it wasn't your choice. Maybe your spouse got called to deployment or
That's true.
got this, business opportunity that they took, and now you had to go with. So that's a problem too, and you don't want to complain about it and make it hard on them. So kids don't know sometimes their parents are sucking things up too. So I think just communication, just being willing to talk with your kids, ask the question. Maybe it's not an issue for them, but at least open the door to the conversation. And for military people, oftentimes when people come back from deployment, they struggle with feeling like they belong in their own homes.
Yeah.
They've been gone, and while they've been gone, whoever the stay-home parent is, they've been making it work. And now this person comes back, and the service member was like, I've been gone for 6, 8, 9 months. Be happy that I'm back. And the other person's like, you've been gone. We've been doing stuff. Get in where you fit in, right? And they don't ever feel like they belong. And sometimes they've done some really hard things that they're carrying back with them that they don't want to burden their family with, so they feel really distant. And I've spoken with people who've reported that their kids are maybe afraid of them. They don't really know them, especially if they left when this kid was really small and they've been on a year deployment. The child has changed a lot. They've changed a lot. And so I would say for the military person that's coming back from deployment, they need to get someone that they can talk to apart from what's happening in the family. And then also the family needs to have some help with the adjustment. But there's not really a good system set up for that right now. And although the military is working really hard to eliminate stigma, it's been ingrained for so long. Most people in the military are not going to want to reach out for help because it could affect their careers. And so they just kind of suck it up. Or it's this idea that if you reach out for help, it's because you're weak. You have a weak mind. And that makes you either not a good soldier or not a good Marine, maybe not dependable. So people just say nothing and suffer. And relationships end, marriages end, and children are separated from their parents because no one's really working at reconnecting and reintegrating. So one of the things that I want to do is kind of reverse the boot camp process. You go to boot camp, and they pretty much take out everything about you, the civilian, and make you whatever branch of the service that you are becoming. There's no reverse process for that. So when you're all done and you get out, it's just like, we can give you some resume help, and here's some college applications. Bye. Right. So
I remember my friend explaining to me when he got out after 8 years of service, and he's like, they spent millions of dollars creating me to be blank, and he's like, his most frustrating part was going to interviews and being like, everything I'm good at is illegal. And just that whole, I remember when he had an experience where he had been gone for a year, came back, and his kid was really little. Like, he got to be there for the birth, everyone was jazzed, and then he left at like 3 months. And I remember, his welcome home party, and just how sad he was because his kid was really struggling with letting him hold him. And the kid was like crying and fussing, and I just sat there and watched my friend's heart like basically break again, because his whole time away was, I can't wait to be with my kid.
Right.
And then my kid doesn't want me.
Yeah, I went through that with my husband. My first child, he was deployed. He was stationed in Japan when I had her. And so she was 4 months old when he came home, and she wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. And it was sad because I was so excited that he was home and he would get to hold her, and she was not having it. And then with our second, he deployed while I was pregnant, but he was home when she was born. But during that deployment is when him and my daughter bonded. So he sent videos. She still has a recording of him reading a storybook to her on VHS. I don't know if we'll ever be able to play it because it's on VHS.
I have one in my classroom you can use.
Okay, yeah. And so we would go to the beach and look at the ships and talk about him being out on the ship. And so that's how they bonded. So by the time he came back that time, by now though she's 2.5. And then he deployed again 6 months after we had our second child. And then he came back and she was like, nope, you left me. I'm good.
Wow.
And has had a hard time bouncing back from that relationally, because I had a 2.5-year-old and an infant, so he was with the infant unless I was feeding her. So they were super, super close. And then for him to come back and she's just like, right? So it was hard for him, and I think it's always going to be hard for him because he didn't get the foundation with his kids that he wanted.
Yeah.
And he didn't abandon them. He went to work. Right. And I think my son-in-law deals with the same thing. You know, there's a lot that he misses because of his job, but he does his job and he does it well, but it's a part of him providing for his family. Right. So it's not like they're a deadbeat dad.
No.
They just went to work, but it still has the same impact.
Absolutely.
The attachment injury is still the same.
Yep.
And I know that, was it this past summer where I was able to be a part of your reset program?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the idea behind Reset, I met with a soldier at some point in the past few years, and he commented that what he really needed was an opportunity to reset. If he could just go somewhere and reset, everything would be okay. He'd been deployed for 9 months. And so that's where the name comes from, is this idea of when you come back, just being able to reset, to reintegrate, to be encouraged, to be supported, to be trained. And so it's a psychoeducation program, and they come for 4 weeks. We talk about attachment. We talk about coping mechanisms. We talk about negative coping mechanisms and positive coping mechanisms. We talk about the effects of war. PTSD, traumatic brain injury, substance abuse. We talk about how normal it is to have the issues that you have because you've gone off and done some things that your soul was never intended to do and to deal with. And then we help them figure out ways to reconnect with their family as well. So we do some EFT. And we also talk about emotionally focused parenting. And so each week they have a different lecture, and then they get to sit in a group, and so for an hour they get to sit with other people who have experienced the same thing and talk about what we just learned. And then over that week they have homework to do as a couple, and the hope is that it gives them a short version of boot camp, but a civilian boot camp. So this is hopefully reversing what they had while they were in the military and helping them be civilians again. They're never going to have the same worldview. You know, they left home and this was everybody's worldview in the house, and then this one person stepped out and now that's their worldview, and they're coming back and everybody else's worldview is still here. So they're never going to be on equal footing. But understanding that, having the spouse that was a stay-home spouse understand what's going on for their partner, having the military spouse understand what's going on for the partner and the children that they left behind, and everybody stop blaming each other, and just understand that this is really hard for all of us, but in different ways. And that we have to figure out a way to make it work for us.
So how do individuals that potentially listen to this podcast get a hold of you for that?
Okay. So I can be reached I work at SIF Counseling Center, and I have an office in Los Alamitos and in Santa Ana. And so I can be reached through SIF. The website is siftcounseling.com, CIFT counseling.com. And my phone number is 714-558-9266, and I'm at extension 238. I can also be reached at Hope International University. And my email there is jmmac-harris@hiu.edu. And my SIF counseling email is jacqueline@sifcounseling.com.
Perfect.
I'm really impressed that you can remember all that.
I was reading it.
I know, I was like, wow. But it'll all be in there too. But I guess it's kind of cool that your reset program can almost be applied in a different lens to third culture kids as well.
Well, that's my hope. My hope is to manualize the program. So for the dissertation, we'll be running the group. We'll have people do a questionnaire at the beginning to figure out where they are attachment-wise, and then again at the end of the 4 weeks. And then we'll also sit and have a focus group to talk about how they experienced the program and what worked and didn't work. And then that will help us redevelop the program so that it's effective, and we'll manualize it, and then we'll also make adaptations to it so that we can use it for missionaries. I'd like to use it for missionaries, military families, and those who are incarcerated that are reintegrating into their families.
Do you need participants for that? Like, do you?
I do. So I am in IRB right now, and so hopefully in the next month or so, IRB will approve me moving forward. We've done the pilot to create the program, but once we are approved to go forward and run the study, I will need 8 to 10 couples to participate, and it's free of charge. It's just a few hours 4 Saturdays, and hopefully they come out of it with a better understanding of what they're experiencing and how they can reconnect with their family and hopefully have healthier, long-lasting, more satisfying relationships.
Now, when you run the program, those 4 Saturdays, are those going to be in Orange County?
They will be in Orange County at Mariners Church Irvine.
Perfect. All right.
Yes. In the community center there.
Okay. So then what are 3 takeaways you would want people to know about your topic today?
So 3 takeaways are, first of all, that what you're feeling, you're actually feeling, right? And that's okay. And that there are other people out in the community that are experiencing the same thing, and that you can go and find them. And that asking for help doesn't make you weak. And a lot of times people don't ask for help because of the stigma, and that just leads to more mental health issues because you're not getting the help early on. So be proactive. If you know that this is a challenge for you, then seek some assistance. Find someone that you can talk to about it.
Nice.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here, blowing our minds.
Thank you.
I
for
can talk to you
having
for a
me.
long time about this.
Thank
I'm like,
you.
we're bonding.
Yes.
I cannot wait to see where you take Reset, because it speaks to my heart of also there's these people out there that serve our country and really put everything on the line, and then we could do a little bit better for when they return to our communities.
Yeah, we could.
And so
And unfortunately, the people who could really do something to change it are still in the military, so they haven't experienced it yet.
yeah.
Right, so
Hopefully you can come back and talk more about that
I
on
would
another
love to.
podcast.
I would love to.
So,
Were there any questions on any of the...
as always, your amazing AJ, your fiance, was on here.
Yay!
He did want to make sure that everyone knows that he does share his food.
He's so much better at sharing food now.